Hi, I'm Frostbrush, and in this video I'll be taking a look at the newly rebuilt Demonology Warlock. But before I get too focused on things, I would like to draw your attention to the design of the artifact weapon, a floating demonic skull. Whilst this could be any disembodied friend to you, such as Wilson or even Companion Cube, my immediate reaction was Murray from Monkey Island, who has finally succeeded in summoning his vengeful demon hordes to take over the world. So in light of this, my avatar shall be Frostbrush Threeplion Mighty Warlock. And with that, let's begin the review. The first thing to note is that the demon form has gone away and been given to the new class Demon Hunters. So the focus of the spec has shifted from transforming yourself into summoning demons. As demon form has gone, so too has the resource system. Warlocks are now uniformly using soul shards and mana. These soul shards function the same as combo points. They stack to 5 with a generator and are consumed with several spenders, all of which summon demons. Pets cost a shard to summon, so you naturally generate and hold 1 shard out of combat to accommodate this. So let's start by looking at the core abilities. All cast times are base before reductions with haste, and the global cooldown of 1.5 seconds is also reduced by haste. Shadowbolt has a 2-second cast and generates 1 soul shard. It's the same as it always has been. Hand of Gul'dan has a 1.5 second cast. It drops a meteor onto the target, dealing shadow flame damage to all enemies within 8 yards. This is your main spender. It consumes 1 to 4 soul shards, with each shard used spawning a wild imp and increasing the damage of the meteor. The meteor impact damage is not split between targets and is shown in the tooltip at its maximum value of 4 shards. Impact damage is linear and is therefore simply the damage of 1 shard multiplied by however many you used. You will be aiming to use 4 shards so as to minimise the time lost to the global cooldown. The wild imps that are summoned last 12 seconds and cast Fell Firebolt. Called Dreadstalkers has a 2-second cast with a 15-second cooldown. Costs 2 shards and summons 2 Dreadstalkers for 12 seconds that leap to the target, cast a shadow damage bite as they arrive, and a physical melee auto attack for their duration. This is your other spender and takes priority over imps. Demonic Empowerment has a 1.5 second cast and increases your pet's haste and health by 50% for 12 seconds. The mastery of the spec is tied into this ability, causing Empowerment to also increase pet damage by the same percentage as your mastery. There is no range limit for this to affect your pets, and whilst you don't have to be facing them, there cannot be a block to line of sight. It benefits from the dot refresh mechanic and adds up to 3 seconds onto the timer. You can cast this without a target and out of combat, so you will be precasting this before every pull. Doom deals shadow damage after 20 seconds, reduced by haste, and generates a soul shard. Corruption seems to have disappeared, and Doom is all that remains. This is deferring a shard, as this is providing you with an imp in the future, assuming whatever it is you cast it on lives long enough. Life Tap restores 30% of your maximum mana, at the cost of 10% of your maximum health. It's the same as it always has been. The pet demons, there hasn't been any real ability changes to the permanent pets, but every spec now has a preferred pet. Imp deals more damage and destruction, Fell Hunter and Affliction, and Demonology still has the Felguard. Along with pets is Command Demon, also unchanged from Warlords. As far as cooldowns, the Doomguard and Infernal are still there, but they now cost a shard to summon. They're on a 3-minute cooldown instead of 10, and they last 25 seconds. The Infernal has a new, more Fel-orientated skin. Surprisingly, Dark Soul has been removed, so I have to assume that the Doomguard or Infernal are intended to take its place. However, the Supremacy talent still exists, which means you can have no innate cooldowns, which is fairly strange for WoW. Lastly, there is the artifact weapon ability, Thalkiel's Consumption. 2-second cast on a 1-minute cooldown. Thalkiel drains the life from your pet and unleashes a blast of shadow damage at your target, equal to the life you stole. Clearly, you want to be using this with as many pets up as possible. Empowerment should be increasing the total health of the demons, but as it seems to be taking a fixed percentage of health from each demon type, it's probable that won't matter. That's all the single target abilities. The core priorities work out as you'd expect. Keep Demonic Empowerment active on all the pets, keep Doom applied to the target, summon Dreadstalkers off cooldown, dump shards into Hand of Gul'dan, and generate shards with Shadowbolt. Since you can precast Empowerment, start with that up to buff your main pet until you start buffing summons. Make sure Doom is on the target, call Dreadstalkers when you have 2 shards, cast Empowerment to buff the Stalkers, then it's simply spamming Shadowbolt until you have 4 shards to cast Hand of Gul'dan for imps, which of course you immediately buff with Empowerment. and then it's just a case of summoning and buffing, and that's pretty much all there is to it at a basic level. As for AoE, the spec doesn't have a huge toolset in its core setup. The AoE abilities are found in the talent tree, which I'll come to in a minute. Demon Wrath. Your demons crackle with demonic energy every 1 second, reduced by haste, for a total of 3 ticks. This is a channeled ability that allows movement. All enemies within 10 yards of any demon take shadow damage, but it only ticks once per enemy, not per demon. And even though it lives vicariously through your demons, it doesn't tick faster with demonic empowerment active. Each time it deals damage, it has a 15% chance to generate a soul shard. As an AoE effect, it means you have a radial AoE wherever your pets are, rather than around the player or target. Since all the other demons aren't controllable, you will have to make sure you position your main pet, or that you have shards ready to go. But dropping imps is going to be very ineffective for mobile AoE because they will be left behind. Only melee demons are viable options for that situation. So if you're using the Doomlord, and a small wave of adds appears away from the boss, your only option to AoE them is by dropping imps. But if you don't have any pets up at all, Wrath doesn't radiate off the player. Whilst there isn't going to be a good reason to not have any pets ready to go, that lack of control makes me a little uneasy. And because you will be completely stationary due to casting requirements, this is what you press when you have to move at any point. But the loss of damage and the reduction in shard generation single target means you really want to stay still. AoE looks like it'll be a little weird without talents, and will be based on the expected lifespans of all targets. The imps and dogs are single target, the only AoE effects are the impact damage from hand and Demon Wrath. The final numbers will determine if you drop empowerment in favour of cycling Wrath and hand, but there is no real difference to the summoning and buffing, you simply switch Shadow Bolt for Wrath. The utility and defensive toolset has been diminished, with several abilities being moved into talents. The rest should be familiar. A quick list of the unedited are Fear, Banish, Enslave Demon, Eye of Kilrog, Unending Breath, Ritual of Summoning, Soul Stones, Unending Resolve, Demonic Gateway, Soul Well, and Health Stones have all survived unchanged. Drain Life deals more damage, but now returns a fixed percentage of health over 6 seconds. The percentage healed increases with stats, but it seems to increase more with haste, from 18% up to 28% in the 110 gear. Soul Link has moved from a talent to become a passive. It still absorbs 20% of all damage and shares it with the pet. The returning heal from your damage is quite a bit stronger with 10% to the player and 40% to the pet with weapon increases. The heal only triggers from damage directly from you, not the pets, so Shadow Bolt, Drain Life and Doom, but Demon Wrath and Thalkiel don't. Soul Leech was a talent, has been moved to the core, but now shields 15% of max health. It absorbs 15% of all damage caused by you and all your pets, including summons, and this shield absorbs all damage, including things like Life Tap. Health Funnel transfers 24% of your health to heal twice as much to the pet. The pet's total health is half of yours, so sacrificing a quarter of your health heals half of theirs. Soul Shatter appears to have gone, and most disappointingly, Demonic Circle has been removed from core abilities and put into the talent tree. Before heading on to talents, let's take a closer look at the mechanics of the summoned demons. First off, the targeting is a little weird. Whilst your permanent pet will change target with you after a few seconds, the summoned demons attack the same target for their whole duration. Crucially, however, the imps will pick whatever you have targeted as they spawn, not the target you cast hand on. They will turn to look at any enemy you select afterwards, but remain casting at their original target. If you don't have an attackable target selected when they spawn, or don't have a pet in combat, they'll run towards you until you attack something, and then shoot that for the rest of their duration. However, Dreadstalkers spawn instantly, so they don't have the same issues as imps, as they stick to whatever you cast them on. This means all summons are effectively location-based dots, and so Demonic Empowerment is basically a buff to all your dots. But as it has a cast time, you inevitably miss the bite and first swing from the dogs. But as the imps are slow to spawn, you can catch every firebolt. Because these summons are on a fixed duration, it's well worth talking about the effects of haste. A few builds ago, demon uptimes were being reduced by haste, but that seems to have been resolved, and we can assume that the uptimes are supposed to be fixed at 12 seconds. In what appears to be an effort to maintain their own sanity, pretty much everything that deals damage on a pet has a base cast time of 2 seconds, and that is reduced by caster haste. 25% character sheet haste gives a 1.6 second cast time for pet DPS abilities. So if you want to know how fast your imps shoot or dogs melee, look at your Shadow Bolt cast time. Demonic Empowerment's haste increases are calculated off this reduced cast time, which means character haste and empowerment are multiplicative. But whilst haste can continuously reduce your Shadow Bolt, every summon is only 12 seconds long, meaning demons have very serious constraints with a discrete cast quantity. So breakpoints become incredibly important, because if you have an imp with 9 casts, every point of haste you have that doesn't break 10 is wasted, because it's completely pointless to the imp, and would be better increasing its damage's mastery. This is not very friendly to the general player base, so a solution to allow continuous scaling without breakpoints would be to fix the number of casts and have haste increase the damage as if it were providing extra casts, and I'm fairly certain they've used that in the past. So with the generalities covered, let's look at specifics. The wild imps cast Fell Firebolt. They take almost 2 seconds to spawn after hand is cast, and the timer starts on spawn, not on cast. They take 150 milliseconds to find your target before they start casting, giving them an effective uptime of 11.85 seconds. This means that with 0 haste, they only get 5 casts instead of 6, which is an immediate example of the discrete breakpoints, with nearly a whole cast wasted. The damage of the Firebolt is variable, I assume attached to weapon damage, which is curious considering that everything else on demons are fixed values. The Dreadstalkers do a couple of things. First, when they are spawned, they cast on themselves Dread Fangs. The tooltip says it increases their crit chance by 10%, but on logs the percentages don't consistently line up with any combination of rates, so I don't know how this is working at the moment. Following the naming convention, on summon the dogs leap to the target and immediately cast Dread Bite, dealing shadow damage. They only cast Bite once as they land. They deal the rest of their damage through a fixed physical melee auto attack that starts at the same time as Bite. Because they cast almost instantly, you cannot catch Bite or the first swing with Empowerment. However, that lands during the cast of the second swing, saving 300 milliseconds or so off the time and giving it increased damage. In regards to the nuances of buffing Empowerment, clearly the most damage you can get out of each summon is when it gets its own Empowerment buff, but that takes up cast time that could have been more imps. Since it buffs all demons, you can cover 2 summons with 1 Empowerment. There's only 2 options, dogs before imps or imps before dogs, and assuming you have 3 dogs, the answer from logging is imps before dogs, which shouldn't be a surprise given imps take time to spawn. Whilst buffing clearly makes sense if it isn't present, it will be interesting to see if it works out that you only want to maintain empowerment around dogs, or if casting it after every summon is what you're supposed to be doing. Okay, let's move on to talents. There are some synergies set up in the trees. Whilst there are new talents, several old ones have remained or been reshuffled, so rather than going through all the old stuff, I'll just skim those tiers. Tier 15. Shadowy Inspiration. Demonic Empowerment also causes your next Shadow Bolt to be instant. This still causes the global cooldown, so ultimately this saves the difference between the global and the base cast time of Shadow Bolt. With no haste, the global is 1.5 seconds and Shadow Bolt is 2. So this is saving at most half a second every time you cast Empowerment, with 4 being enough time to cast an extra Shadow Bolt. But being tied to Empowerment is a determining factor, and you're only casting Empowerment roughly twice every 15 seconds in non-conduit builds. So this is basically worth 1 extra shard every 30 seconds. If you put this up with 25% haste, the gap is 0.4 seconds, which is roughly 4 shards in 90. Shadow Flame. Instant 14-second recharge, 2 charges. Lob a ball of Shadow Flame at the target, dealing instant Shadow Flame damage, and then a dot over 8 seconds stacking up to 3. Generates 1 shard. The impact damage doesn't stack, just the dot. You get 4 ticks in the 8 seconds, and starts after 2 seconds. Because of the dot extension mechanics, you'll be applying another stack between seconds 6 and 8, so the 4th tick is added into the next stack. So you get 3 ticks at 1 stack, 4 ticks at 2, and 5 ticks at 3. You have a 2-second window to refresh, but it has a travel time that also needs to be factored in. So throw this at 6 seconds, and it'll land somewhere around 7. Done correctly, this will last 24 seconds. With the bulk of a recharge being handled within the final stacks, you only need to wait 20 seconds before you start again. So this generates 3 shards every 44 seconds in a repeating loop. Of course you don't want to cap the charges, so you have a 2-second window before they cap where you can start again and the recharging will match. However, if you go at 18 seconds, there is a very high risk of dropping stacks. You really want to be aiming closer to 20 seconds just before charges cap to account for human error. Demonic Calling. Shadowbolt has a 20% chance to make your next core Dreadstalkers cost no shards. You are casting around 6 Shadowbolts between dogs, so there is a good chance that you will be triggering this most of the time. It's worth 2 imps, which when combined with the impact damage of hand, seems to do more damage than Shadowflame. But it also gives a very strong mechanical option because hand takes 4 of the 5 shards. Having 3 dogs means you can cast Imp's Dog's Empowerment, which frees up more time for Shadowbolts. 30. The Tier of Imp Puns. Impending Doom. Doom also summons 1 wild imp when it deals damage. Probably the best pun as you go because you can read it as Imp Ending Doom. Sadly, that's the most interesting part of the talent. Only becomes really useful when combined with AoE on things that will survive long enough for Doom to trigger, which is nearly 20 seconds, at which point Demon Bolt users get incredibly excited, but that's a really long time for adds to survive, so this will usually be the choice for long AoE fights. Improved Dreadstalkers. Core Dreadstalkers now also summons 2 imps. They went a bit cute with this and put the imps riding the dogs. The imps don't have the same targeting issues as they appear tied to the dogs. They spawn instantly and take 50 milliseconds before casting. Because of the instant spawn, you cannot empower their total duration, missing the first cast, and so the imps on the dogs cast fewer times than imps from hand. With 25% haste and empower, imps cast 9 times, but on dogs they only cast 7. Dog imps used to deal more damage than hand imps, which, if I remember reading, was viewed as a bug. Now they deal the same, but considering they are less effective than normal imps, there should be some increases to bring them level. Implosion. Demonic forces suck all of your wild imps towards the target, and then cause them to violently explode, dealing Shadowflame damage to all enemies within 8 yards. This is an instant cast on the global cooldown, with no cooldown, but obviously requires imps to be present. The explosion is triggered per imp, and is not split between targets. It can be cast on something other than what the imps are shooting at, but there is a range limit, and a short delay between gripping the imps and the explosion. It can be used at any point during the imp's duration, obviously the best result being at the end. Due to the spawn delay, it is possible to explode the previous set before the next set land, but all of this is outside of shard mechanics, and it does delay demonic empowerment. For an AoE talent, the damage is actually okay. At my gear levels, it is roughly 60% of the total output of an empowered imp. But as mastery increases, that percentage will go down. And of course, since it triggers per imp, you can build up stacks of imps for a single snap AoE. Tier 45 is basically the old Tier 30, with the new talent from this build. Demon Skin. Soul Leech now passively recharges at a rate of 1% of max health every 1 second, and may now absorb up to 20% of max health. This is the new talent for this build, as Leech has become baseline. This drops the build time to around 10 seconds from open. It also provides you with a 15-second buffer when using Burning Rush before you take damage, and you will take less damage after that point, as it is also affected by Link and now Leech. So some good quality of life there. Hopefully this survives. Mortal Coil is unchanged, and Shadow Fury is functionally unchanged except that it now has a 1.5 second cast time, which I find quite disappointing. 60 is the Shard Generation tier. Hand of Doom. Hand of Gul'dan also applies Doom to all enemies that it hits. This has a very minor impact single target, but it's clearly aimed at AoE. It frees up a global per target hit, which makes it stronger with more targets, and is even a requirement for AoE when using the Beholder. Because most adds are short-lived in raids, the AoE shard generation has limited value, because more than likely everything dies before Doom ticks. But if they don't, anything beyond 5 targets is completely wasted because you've capped out shards. Power Trip. Demonic Empowerment now has a 50% chance to generate a Soul Shard. Previously this was 100%, which was great. At 50% it's less dazzling but still brings empowerment into the shard system. You're casting empowerment about twice every 15 seconds. The difference is that you'll be losing a global cooldown casting Doom. Even if you have a blocked line of sight between you and your pets, chain casting empowerment will still provide you with shards, which means if there is a transition period in a fight with nothing to do, you spam this to build shards whilst you wait. Soul Harvest. 2-second cast, 1-minute cooldown. Refill 5 soul shards. There's not much to say about this, it gives you a fixed quantity instead of variable, which amounts to a wave of imps on demand. 75 used to be Grimoires, but that is now 90. This tier finds the rest of the utility that used to make a solid toolset, except now you only get one. Demonic Circle. Yes, this is now a talent. It also has a terrible design that changes the spell button on cast, so that when you place a circle, the button changes to teleport. You can't replace the circle unless you cancel the buff on yourself, which you can't do in combat without a cancel aura macro. They can't claim ease of use because it's still 2 buttons. Hopefully this will be changed back because it helps nobody like this. Burning Rush is still the same. Dark Pact is a renamed Sacrificial Pact. The name was combined with, I assume, Dark Bargain, but that's been removed from the talent tree, and this is just Sacrificial Pact. Tier 90 is the Grimoire tier, because all the talents that were here have gone, but it's still pretty much like Warlords. Supremacy. Used to be upgraded versions of pets. Those have all gone, but the skins are now available as glyphs. Basically, Servitude is now Supremacy, so this gives permanent control over Doomguards and Infernals. They're quite strong at the moment, with Doomguard dealing roughly 55% more total damage than the Felguard. Each cost a shard, and have a base summon time of 2.5 seconds, reduced by haste, with the damage currently being single target Doomguard and 2+ Infernal. Whilst the cast time is shorter, I really doubt switching pets will be standard practice. Service. Same as Warlords, summons a second demon for 25 seconds, deals a token 5% more damage, uses its ability on summon, and has a 90-second cooldown. Combine this with the 3-minute Doomguard, and it's the most cooldown orientated build. Synergy. When you or your demon deal damage, there is a 100% chance to trigger Synergy, granting the other 30% increased damage for 15 seconds. It reads like it consistently provides both you and your pet 30% more damage, but it's very sporadic in its application with no consistent internal cooldown. So I don't know what the final goals for it will be. Both you and the pet can have the buff at the same time, and the buff and trigger are only from the permanent pet, not the summons. The player buff doesn't loop back to your demon, which would have made it 30% on 30%. It's just a flat increase for both sides. You would think that 30% extra damage beats everything, but you and your pet combined make up a little under half of your total damage. The majority is imps and dogs, unaffected by this talent. So this talent is really only felt with Demon Bolt, because that 30% is applied at the end of the calculation. Tier 100, Summon Beholder. Costs 1 shard, with a 24-second cooldown. Instant. Summon a Beholder that launches eye lasers, hitting all targets you have doomed. Lasts 12 seconds. As this is a summon, you can empower it, and it functions almost identically to a dog in that respect. Spawns instantly, Eye Beam has a 2-second cast, and it immediately starts casting on a loop, which only connects to targets with Doom. So that means you need to have Doom up on targets beforehand. Single target, this is just another summon to tie into the group, but with AoE it requires Hand of Doom to function properly. Because Hand consumes all shards up to 4, for effective AoE you need to have 5 shards in order to chain Imps, Beholder, Empowerment. Combining the Infernal and the Beholder you can get some quite passable AoE going, but it doesn't seem competitive single target. Demon Bolt. Draws energy from your demons and launches a ball of demonic energy at the target, dealing chaos damage. Damage is increased 30% for each demon that you have. Replaces Shadow Bolt. The increased damage is an additive 30% onto the base damage for every demon. You always have 1 out with your pet, so with 1 wave of imps, 5 demons, it gives 150% extra damage. This talent is a little curious, because while Shadow Bolt does generate the shards, it is otherwise outside of the mechanics. The player is basically filler casting Shadow Bolt, whilst the pets do the heavy lifting. And with the exception of this talent, the spec isn't interested in player damage. So whilst pet damage will increase with mastery, the variation in the total quantity of demons is very limited, usually between 8 or 12 summons at a time. Whilst you can do some tweaks to bunch up your shards, trying to get more demons, you really don't have much room to demonstrate player quality. Soul Conduit. Every soul shard you spend has a 30% chance to be refunded. This is a newly introduced talent. The chance is independent for each shard, so you can spend 4 and get 4 back, or nothing. So when it procs well, you can get 16, sometimes even 20 imps, and whilst that provides quite reasonable increases to your DPS, it's not predictable. So that's all the talents individually. Let's look at some builds built off the level 100 talents, skipping the utility tiers because they don't affect what you're doing. So the first one will be Demon Bolt, and will be single target focused, aiming at maximising both player damage and demon quantities. Demonic Calling lets you pair summoning imps and dogs together to give you the longest combined uptime. Improved Dreadstalkers gives you 4 demons every 15 seconds instead of 2. Combined with Demonic Calling means you can rapidly summon 8 demons every 15 seconds. Soul Harvest, I'm not sure how often you cast Empowerment with Demon Bolt, and this lets you call 4 imps on demand. But if you have multiple targets that will live a while, Hand of Doom should give you more imps. Grimoire of Synergy, 30% extra damage onto Demon Bolt. And as I said, this isn't an additive 30% like it's an extra demon. It's multiplied on the total damage. There is also a trait from the artifact weapon, Stolen Power. Every time a pet deals damage, you gain a stack that builds to 100, at which point it adds double damage to your Demon Bolt. Unfortunately, you don't seem able to see what the stack count is anymore, so a lot of them are just being wasted. Once you can see the rate and stack count, you can start building around it. So this build works off of summoning cycles around dogs. Starting with dogs on cooldown, once you get a Demonic Calling proc, build 5 shards and cast Imps, Dogs and Power. The reason for the extra shard is that you want as many casts during uptime as possible, and if you combine this with the Doom proc, you gain half the time needed for another wave of Imps. But that's all the prep you can do. I started out thinking that gameplay had some pressure to it, trying to maximise casts during the highest quantities of demons. But I soon realised there isn't any pressure, because everything is so mechanically rigid you are sitting at basically the same quantity of demons the whole time, even when using Soul Harvest. Planning has minimal impact. I feel it make gameplay much more compelling if there was a way to controllably increase the quantity of demons beyond this narrow range. And I don't mean Harvest because it really doesn't do anything. Just anything so that you are able to, and be rewarded for, efficiently summoning a large pile of imps, whilst putting in some variation and importance to what you actually cast. That would make the damage into a wave, that would put some impetus in actually having a brain, and also put you in control of your own consistent burst. Of all the 100 talents, this has the greatest potential, but right now it's the most soporific basic rotation. The AoE build is based off Beholder. There isn't really anything in tier 15. If you're doing a boss with intermittent waves of adds, I would go for Demonic Calling so that you can drop hands without losing shards to dogs. If AoE is persistent, then you're using Wrath, so that's a total waste, making your only other option Shadowy Inspiration. But whether you would actually lose a global for just 1 shard when you could cap 5 in 3 seconds will depend on how many short you are. Implosion is the AoE ability in that tier. Shadow Fury, because the stun could help out even if you do have to cast it. Hand of Doom, required to make Beholder function. And Grimoire of Supremacy, Infernal, the immolation aura is affected by haste and empowerment. As I said earlier, you need to have 5 shards ready before Beholder is up, so you can open with hand to spread Doom. That eats 4, and then use the 5th to summon Beholder and immediately empower everything. Shard generation will be from Demon Wrath, so it will be very unpredictable, but the goal is to get Beholder off cooldown and as much life out of the imps between waves before imploding the old sets as you land new ones. With enough mobs, it shouldn't take more than 2 rounds to drop another hand. Also, make sure you have spent all shards before Doom ticks, so that you can get a full cap without wasting any you already have. It's very easy, and that's pretty much all there is I can see to it. The last build is from Soul Conduit, and it's like the general spec. Shadowy Inspiration, because of Power Trip. Implosion, the sheer volume of imps you'll be spawning, you can put them to good use. Power Trip, you are summoning waves of imps every few seconds, and it really works with Shadowy Inspiration. Supremacy, because there isn't really anything to buff, so Doomguard or Infernal. Soul Conduit has reaction-based gameplay. You get 4 shards, drop imps, empower, then instant Shadow Bolt, giving you back 1 or 2 shards, which will usually be enough to immediately drop another set of imps. Then you just repeat the process. Implosion to make use of the tide of imps during AoE, and even single target if you find yourself with a bit of downtime when it won't overwrite any fresh sets. The variability requires you to make some quick decisions, but the inconsistency of the procs means that you will lose out to the controllable nature of Beholder and Demon Bolt. But for anything sustained, or general questing and dungeons, I use this spec. Comparing the 3 builds, unfortunately, the gameplay of every build is practically independent of whatever you're fighting. It could be a single boss or 100 mobs. There is no real difference in what you're doing. Only Demon Bolt cares what you're fighting against, and how you're doing it. But that's only because of impending doom on AoE boosting your single target, and then that doesn't change the underlying mechanics, it just means you line up your summoning cycle around doom. When you compare shard generation, Demon Bolt and Beholder are similar in terms of their rigidity, and it's now Conduit that has the greatest variability, and the increases to pace make it more interesting because at least now you need to actually make some decisions. But one of the most worrying things for me is stats. I've not done the weights, but just the logic behind them seems so confused. In a general sense, we want Mastery and Crit for pet damage, Haste to increase shard generation, and total pet casts. But because of the breakpoints, the value of Haste will inevitably slide around between those discrete intervals. But Haste is also massively devalued, because Empowerment provides 60% baseline Haste to pets, along with combining talents like Power Trip and Shadowy Inspiration, making it instant. If we take the builds in turn, Beholder will be the most general, and being AoE based should be looking at Mastery main with a mix of Haste and Crit. But Conduit, with its reduction in the number of hard-casted Shadow Bolts, from both the 30% procs and Shadowy Trip turning them instant, really doesn't need Haste as much outside of pet DPS. So that appears to be more Mastery with much more Crit than Haste. But Demon Bolt is a talent outside of Mastery. Because the summon time is fixed at 12 seconds, the more haste you can get, the more shards you can generate, and the more demons you have up. Crit will also be there because you want those stolen power shots to be crits. But Demon Bolt doesn't use Mastery, and pets make up so much of your damage you have to actively reduce your primary damage sources to hopefully outweigh that loss by increasing an otherwise meaningless ability, Shadow Bolt. So not only do you need a completely new set of gear with lower Mastery, but not having any tie-in means this talent will find it much harder to survive later in the expansion, because whilst pet damage can be easily and marginally increased, slightly more haste doesn't suddenly provide huge quantities of demons. But really that's it for talents and builds. Before I wrap up, let's just take a brief look at the weapons. As I said at the beginning, I enjoy having my very own Murray, but the build of the tree is about as interesting as all the others, so I'm not going to dig through it. Nothing on the weapon has gameplay impact, beyond possibly stolen power, but you can't add relics to that. So there are, however, 3 damage modifiers worth noting. Infernal Furnace. Increase the damage of Imp Firebolt by 30% at 3 ranks. The bulk of your damage is from Imps. Add 3 relics for an extra 30% Firebolt damage, but that will have a knock-on effect to things like Implosion. More of Shadows. Increases crit chance of Shadow Bolt by 10%. This would be for Demon Bolt, so adding on more crit is good, but if you aren't playing that, this is completely pointless. Summoner's Prowess. Increases haste and health provided by Empowerment by 10%, so this puts the baseline at 60%, with 3 relics it would be 70%. Your damage is pets, and if this puts the breakpoint such that it gets an extra swing out of every pet during its lifespan that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get, this will be great. Along those same lines, this is a proxy for Mastery. You could take the allocation of haste needed to hit a breakpoint and instead replace it with Mastery. But if it doesn't do either, you are wasting relics. All 3 of these are on the left side of the tree, so I'm guessing the unlock route is just the loop round the left. And with that, we arrive at the conclusion of another marathon analysis. Overall, I think it looks quite simple for new players to get the hang of, but potentially has enough moving parts to keep some longer term interest. I'm disappointed that the utility has been cut back, and the lack of a 2-minute cooldown makes me a little uneasy. But the fundamental structure of the mechanics are okay, even if there isn't much differentiation and it does have a few problems. I'd say overall, it's not looking bad. I guess the only thing left is the miscellaneous section. Doing detailed reviews are interesting for me because honestly, these aren't much different to what I do for basically any game I play. Obviously, without the weeks of consolidating testing and writing scripts, but I'm starting to think the scale I'm going to is wasted on builds that have changed so often. And whilst there have been changes on basically everything I've talked about through the videos, that's much more likely coincidental than causal. So I'm considering doing some shorter mechanical overviews rather than completely dismantling a spec over several weeks and presenting a single massive block of information. Which I can still do, and they will always be done later, but, I only have to do them once. I suppose it's because there is a lot of things I would like to look at before release, but time is pushing forwards, and at 1 spec a month, I just can't make it at this pace. Let me know what you think, and either way, I hope you found this interesting. So as ever, please leave comments or questions, and thanks for watching.